There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a room when a deal dies. Not the quiet of an argument ending, not the quiet after a door slams. It is the quiet of a man realizing, all at once, that the thing he built his next chapter on is not going to happen, that the papers in front of him are not going to get signed. That the other person at the table knew this before he walked in. Mitchell Vance had been in that room for 11 minutes when he understood that. I watched the color change in his face. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Let me back up. Welcome to Real Life Verdict. Get comfortable. The people in this story had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. My name is Clarence. I am 64 years old. I drive a 2004 Honda Accord with a beach towel wedged behind the driver's seat because the lumbar support stopped adjusting somewhere around 2017, and I never got around to fixing it. I own 30% of my wardrobe in shades of blue. I take my coffee without sugar. On the third Thursday of every month, I teach a 2-hour workshop at the county library called Small Business Insurance Basics. I have been doing this since 2006. I use the same 3-ring binder. I update it every January. The people who come are restaurant owners and contractors and a woman who runs a mobile dog grooming service out of a converted camper van. I teach them how to read their own policies, not the summary, the actual policy. The exclusions, the conditions, the definitions section that nobody reads until something goes wrong. I do this because I have spent 33 years in commercial insurance and I have watched people lose things they did not have to lose because they trusted a document they never read. I find that unacceptable. I always have. In 1991, I co-founded Vance & Associates Insurance Group with a man named Mitchell Vance. Mitchell's name came first on the letterhead because it sounded better. I did not care about that then. I want to be honest with you. I did not care about it for a long time. Mitchell was good at things I was not. He could walk into a room full of strangers and 20 minutes later seem like the most important person in it. He remembered birthdays. He sent Christmas cards with handwritten notes. He wore suits that fit him like they'd been designed specifically for his body. He had a handshake that made people feel chosen. I handled underwriting. I reviewed policies. I found the gaps, the things that looked like coverage until something happened, and they weren't. Mitchell would bring in a client, and I would make sure the policy actually did what the client thought it did. That was our arrangement. It worked for 20 years. His wife Angela came on as office manager in 1998. She is 61 years old and wears reading glasses on a beaded chain that clicks against her collarbone when she walks. She is organized, punctual, and thorough. She ran the office the way a ship's navigator runs a tight course. Every detail logged, every deviation noted. I liked Angela. For a long time, I liked both of them. There was one thing about Mitchell I noticed and never commented on. When he used my office to make calls, my desk, my chair, my space, he would leave his coffee mug there afterward. Just leave it. He never washed it, never brought it back to the kitchen. He would just sit it down on the corner of my desk and walk out. It was a small thing. I mention it because small things are worth mentioning. On April 11th, 2023, a man named Harold Garrett called our office. Harold was a prospective client, a contractor who'd been referred to us by someone in his industry group. He had come in for a pitch meeting that morning. Mitchell had run it. I was not invited. I assumed it was a scheduling thing. I was working on a policy review for another client, and the meeting had not appeared on my calendar. Harold reached me eventually, not through Angela, who told him I wasn't available, but through his brother-in-law, who happened to come to my library workshop 2 weeks later and mentioned the conversation in passing. Harold had liked something about the pitch. He'd wanted a second opinion on the coverage terms. He'd asked to speak to the other man, the one who co-founded the firm. Angela told him I was not available. What Harold's brother-in-law told me, over a folding table at the county library, was that Mitchell had explained my absence during the pitch meeting. He had said it plainly, as a matter of fact. The way you might mention that a conference room is being repainted, he had said. Clarence is semi-retired. I handle everything now. I drove home that evening at my usual time. I made dinner. I washed the dishes. I sat down at my kitchen table at 6:30 the following morning with my coffee and opened my laptop and started reading. I want you to understand something about me. I did not call Mitchell. I did not go into the office and put his coffee mug through the window. I did not call a lawyer. I know how that looks. I know what you expected me to do. But I have been reading documents for 33 years. I have learned that you do not pick up a policy and demand answers before you have read every single page. You read first, then you act. I went down to my basement that morning and found the binder I had filed in 1991, the one with the founding partnership agreement. I read it the way I read every document, from the beginning without skipping. I found what I was looking for on page 7, but I am not there yet. Before I got to page 7, I had to understand how long this had been happening. I want you to stay with me here because this is where everything I thought I understood started to come apart. The client meetings moved in May of 2022. Mitchell started booking a rented conference room across town. I was not told why. He mentioned it casually. Better parking, more professional atmosphere. I accepted this. I am telling you that now because I want you to know I did not see it coming. I thought it was a preference. I thought he was being practical. By August 2022, I noticed I was no longer being copied on client emails. I assumed it was an oversight. I mentioned it once to Angela. She said she would look into it. The emails did not resume. By November, client calls to my direct line had slowed to almost nothing. I told myself this was natural. Mitchell had always been the primary contact. Clients called him. He called me when he needed something reviewed. That had always been the arrangement. I was wrong about what that arrangement meant. On April 26, I opened my email at 6:30 in the morning and found an auto-reply from Angela's inbox. She was out of office, it said, for client meetings all week. I opened our shared calendar. There were no meetings listed. I sat with that for a moment. Not a long moment. Long enough. Then I went downstairs. On May 3rd, I was in the break room when I heard Mitchell's voice coming from his office. The door was open. He was not whispering, he said. The transition will be seamless. I've already delegated his accounts. I poured my coffee. I did not spill it. I walked back to my desk. He believed I was already gone. That is the thing I want you to understand. He was not hiding from me. He did not lower his voice because it did not occur to him that what he was saying was something I needed to hear. In his understanding of events, I had already left. He was just handling the paperwork. On May 9th, after my monthly workshop, a client named Gerald Huff shook my hand and told me he wanted to say it properly before it happened. That it had been a privilege working with me and he'd misseen me at renewals. I asked him what he meant. He looked surprised. He said Angela had told him I was retiring at the end of the year. I thanked him for coming. I drove home. I wondered, briefly, if I was seeing a pattern that wasn't there. This is the honest part of the story. I have watched people construct explanations that fit what they want to believe, and I have always thought I was not that kind of person. I considered the possibility that Mitchell had simply been managing the transition of a business in a way he thought was efficient, and that I was adding sinister architecture to something that was clumsy but not malicious. I considered that for about 2 days. About the coffee mug, small things are worth mentioning. On May 16th, I drove to a low brick building on the west side of town where a man named Dennis Halloran runs an industrial cleaning company. Dennis is 68 years old. He wears a Navy windbreaker to every meeting we've ever had. He still has his retired fire marshal badge clipped to the collar even though he hasn't worked in 6 years. He is one of my oldest clients. His general liability policy renews every March, and I have read every version of it since 1999. I asked Dennis if he'd been thinking about adding coverage for the new pressure equipment he brought on in the spring. He said he had. I explained that a new rider, one that changed the coverage terms significantly, would cross the threshold requiring a policy amendment, that any change of that magnitude would need both partners' signatures to be valid. Dennis looked at me. He has the particular quality of attention that men who have spent decades in emergency work sometimes develop, a stillness that means he is calculating, not drifting. He asked what this was about. I said, just making sure things are done right. He nodded once and said, "You wrote that policy, Clarence. If you're saying it needs your signature, then I'm not signing a damn thing until you're in the room." I had one thing Mitchell had not accounted for. I had known about it since 6:30 on the morning of April 26th. I was not ready to use it yet. I needed Mitchell to go far enough that stopping him would cost him something he could feel. I did not have to wait long. On May 22nd, I pulled into the office parking lot at 8 in the morning and found a man in a dark suit photographing the building exterior. He photographed the sign. He photographed the parking lot. He got into a car with rental plates and drove away. I did not ask Mitchell who he was. I did not need to. I drove home that evening and started a spreadsheet. 23 client meetings I had been excluded from since May 2022. I printed the list. I put it in a binder. I labeled the binder Partnership Record. I did not show it to anyone. I was not building a weapon. I was building a foundation. There is a difference. On June 2nd at 7:14 in the morning, Dennis Halloran forwarded me an email. The subject line was, "Exciting transition ahead for Vance and Associates." Angela had sent it to every client in our book. The email announced that the firm was being acquired by a regional insurance group and that founding partner Clarence Booker was retiring to enjoy a well-earned rest. I was not copied on the email. I read it twice. I wrote down the date, time, and location of the closing meeting from Dennis's forwarded copy. I did not reply to Angela. I did not call Mitchell. I closed my laptop and finished my coffee. That evening I called a woman named Ruth Kowalski. Ruth is 57 years old, and for 11 years she ran Big Ruth's Pierogi Wagon, a food truck that I will tell you was worth the drive on any given Thursday. She sold the truck 3 years ago, but she still keeps a laminated photo of it in the sun visor of her van. I have never asked her why. Some things don't need explaining. Ruth has access to the community center hall for events. I asked if she could reserve it for June 13th. She asked what for. I said, a meeting. She said, I don't need the whole story. How many tables you need and what time? 6 tables, I said. 6 in the evening. She said it was done. Now, this is where I need to stop and tell you the thing that has been sealed the entire time we have been talking. Mitchell believed my 40% equity stake in Vance and Associates was decorative. He believed that 20 years of deference had made it inert, that a man who never fought for credit had no tools for fighting at all. He was planning to sell our firm, a firm worth $1.8 million, and hand me whatever percentage of the proceeds he calculated I could not legally challenge. He had forgotten one thing I had not. On page 7 of the founding partnership agreement that I filed in a basement binder in 1991, there is a clause. I insisted on it when we incorporated. Mitchell agreed to it because, at the time, he thought $50,000 was an impossibly high threshold, something we would never actually reach in a single transaction. He thought of it as a formality, a safeguard that would never be triggered. The clause states that no business decision with a value exceeding $50,000 is legally executable without the written consent of both partners. Both partners. I have full voting rights. I am not a silent investor. I am not a passive minority partner. I am a co-founder with a contractual veto over every transaction above a threshold that Mitchell stopped thinking about sometime in the early 2000s. He had spent 4 months negotiating a $1.8 million sale. He had announced it to clients. He had, I assume, already spent some portion of it in his imagination. He had not obtained my consent. He had not asked for my signature. He had not, as far as I can determine, once looked at page 7 of the document he signed in 1991. I read every document. That is what I do. It is the only thing I have always done without exception. On June 6th, I put on the blue sport coat I wore to our firm's 20th anniversary dinner. I got into my Accord. I drove downtown. I found parking 2 blocks from the attorney's office and walked in carrying a manila folder. I arrived at 1:55 p.m. The conference room was on the 3rd floor. Long table, 8 chairs, a window overlooking a parking deck, beige walls, a whiteboard covered in writing that no one had erased. Mitchell and Angela were already seated. There was a man across the table, the regional VP for the insurance consortium, I understood, and next to him, a woman with a legal pad and a pen, the buyer's attorney. Mitchell looked at me the way you look at a car in a lane you did not check, he said. Clarence, we weren't expecting you. I nodded at the attorney and took the empty seat at the end of the table. The attorney introduced herself. She walked through the purchase agreement. She asked the parties to review the signature page. She pushed the document toward me. I opened my folder. I placed the founding partnership agreement on the table in front of her, face up. I set my finger on page 7. I said, no decision over $50,000 is valid without my signature. I was not consulted about this sale. I do not agree to it. I looked at the attorney, not at Mitchell. She picked up the document. She read the clause. She looked at Mitchell. Mitchell said I had known this was coming, that I had been planning to retire, that this was what we had discussed. The attorney asked if I had signed any documentation indicating intent to dissolve the partnership or retire from the firm. Mitchell said we had an understanding. She asked if there was documentation. He did not have documentation. There was no documentation because there had been no discussion. There had been a coffee mug left on my desk and an email I was not copied on and a phrase delivered in a pitch meeting to a prospective client. Clarence is semi-retired. I handle everything now. She closed her file. She told the buyer the sale could not proceed without my written consent. She told Mitchell that proceeding without that consent would expose both parties to significant liability. The buyer stood up. He shook the attorney's hand. He did not shake Mitchell's hand. He walked out. I watched what happened to Mitchell's face when that door closed. I am not going to describe what he felt. I am going to tell you that the color that had been in his face when I walked in was no longer there. He looked at me and I could see him reaching for something to say, an argument, an accusation, something, and finding nothing. Angela had not spoken once during the meeting. She was looking at a spot on the table in front of her. Her reading glasses were on their chain. She did not touch them. I picked up my folder. I stood up. I nodded once at the attorney. I walked out. I drove back to the office. I unlocked my desk and took the 3 client files I had been actively working. I placed Mitchell's coffee mug, which had been sitting on the corner of my desk for 11 days, on Mitchell's desk. His actual desk. Not the corner. The center. I did not come back the next day. On June 13th, I walked into the community center hall that Ruth had reserved. 6 tables, 40 chairs. 28 clients came. I told them what had happened. I told them I was starting a new firm. I did not editorialize. I did not ask anyone to choose. I gave them the facts the way I give them their policy details. Clearly, completely, without omission. Within 30 days, 16 of them moved their policies to me. I drove home from that meeting the long way. Summer evening. Windows down. I passed the office building. The parking lot quiet, the sign still up in the last of the light. I have a folded beach towel wedged behind the seat of my car because the lumbar support doesn't work, and I never fixed it. Some things you just accommodate. Some things you just accommodate. Some things, it turns out, you don't have to. Mitchell Vance built a firm for 20 years and decided sometime in the spring of 2022 that he had built it alone. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things. The one he'll feel longest is page 7.